One, Jared is okay, right? To call you by Jared is okay.
Absolutely, please,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And then would you like folks to, are you able to answer questions during, or would you like to wait
Well,
until
so
the
what
end?
I was hoping to do today, Alexander, is last time we spoke, we talked a little bit about symptoms, and so I have a video that's about 30 minutes that's
Mm-hmm.
by a
Mm-hmm.
doctor from the University of Maryland who's an expert in Parkinson's disease, and I thought it would be interesting because both Jan and I are not doctors. You know, Jan is works for us, but her husband has Parkinson's, and I am just the CEO of this small nonprofit. It's called what Parkinson Foundation of the National Capital Area. But I thought it'd be helpful to hear from a doctor. And since it's hard to have doctors available during the workday because they're all seeing patients, I thought it'd be
Mm-hmm.
worthwhile to show about a 30-minute video to give you kind of a medical perspective on the disease. And then I'd love to chat after that video if that sounds okay.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for that. And yes, if you would like to respond or share your thoughts on the video that Jared shows, please raise your hand in Zoom. You tap more,
You can
then
do it in
raise
chat.
hand.
You can do it afterwards. So
Yeah, the chat.
in a
Mm-hmm.
moment, I'll go ahead and I think you've already given me controls here, so I should be able to share my screen.
Yes.
So
And
let me.
last but not least, do you have a disclaimer?
I don't have a disclaimer.
Okay, I'm gonna share that with the group first, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Yeah, and this is just our disclaimer for our session. So the WildTech DC Senior iPad program, its owners and presenters offer technical assistance, virtual health, well-being information designed for educational purposes only. You should not rely on the information in any applications or topics made by WildTech, including but not limited to mobile and device applications and any social media pages maintained by WildTech, its owners or presenters as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, treatment, or legal advice. Thank you so much for letting me read the disclaimer. And without further ado, the floor is yours, Jared. And again, thank you so
Alexander,
much for coming on
that
to
was a
today.
great disclaimer. We're not that formal. We normally just say we're not doctors. And so if you have questions about your health, you should always consult your primary care physician, who could also refer you to a specialist if needed. But in a way, I like your disclaimer better, Alexander, because it kind of puts it all out there in writing. But I appreciate that. So I'm happy to share my screen,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to start with this video here. Are you all seeing my screen?
Yes, you're good. You're good to
Great.
go.
So this is
I'm
Dr.
here.
Paul. This is Dr. Paul Fishman from the University of Maryland, and in a moment I'll press play. It's going to run almost 32 minutes with his presentation. But every year our foundation does an educational conference in Northern Virginia. Um, Since the pandemic, we've been doing it online and by Zoom, but for years it was in Northern Virginia. This lecture was recorded about 5 years ago, but we found in all these years it's one of the best lectures as an overview of Parkinson's disease. And we've got literally more than 50 or 60 lectures that we've got in our files, but we think this is one of the best. And so when we have an opportunity to meet with folks like yourselves, we love to share just to give you a good overview of the disease from a doctor. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce you to a video of Dr. Paul Fishman of University of Maryland. Here we go.
And neurobiology at the University of Maryland. Dr. Fishman's presentation is titled as ABCs of Parkinson's.
Can you hit the full screen button, the bottom right of the video?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, so this is going to be
there you
obviously a superficial flyover.
We don't hear any sound, Mr. Jared.
Next competition.
There you go. Whatever you had, it played.
I stopped it. I may not be good enough on Zoom to know how to share my sound through Zoom.
Yeah, so if you try to go to another window when you're sharing your screen, it stops the screen share.
Yeah, I'm still in the same window. I haven't changed windows.
Yeah, so when you hit share screen in Zoom, it will say share. So just stop sharing your screen for a second. And then when you hit share screen, on the right, well, on my end, it says options. So make sure share sound is on.
I see. Okay, thank you for that. You can tell me how to do this.
It's okay.
Let me do this. And then I got to go back and get the video. So give me a moment to grab the video again. I think it's right here. There it is. Okay.
in northern Maryland. So that's where I'll be.
Can you switch to the window that you're on or the video?
Is that not what's showing?
So no, we see, I think you selected the window. So can you stop sharing your screen again?
Okay.
And then when you hit share screen, can you select the window with the video in it?
Right. Trying to find that one. Yeah. Now I see it. I apologize.
It's okay. Yep.
Let's try.
And then
Let's
hit
try
play.
again. All right. Here we go.
Well, it's close to
Is that
200
better?
You're good to
years
go.
from when James Parkinson
Yep.
originally
Great job.
described this disease that he called the shaking palsy. Since from an outside perspective, the kind of obvious thing was the shaking of the hands. Now we appreciate there are many other issues in Parkinson's besides tremor. There are about, round numbers, there are about a million people in this country, at least a million people in this country in Parkinson's. There are 60,000 new cases. Average age, when it begins, is between 55 and 60. And again, you keep accumulating people because Parkinson's actually doesn't affect life expectancy. So as the years go on, more and more of the population has Parkinson's disease to the extent that even if you didn't have Parkinson's, you would know someone who had Parkinson's because 3% of the population over age 65 has Parkinson's. Parkinson's is one of what we call neurodegenerative diseases. And for all of these, the vast majority of patients, we have no clear cause. We can't go and tell a patient with Parkinson's or a patient with Alzheimer's or a patient with ALS, this is why you got the disease in 90% plus of cases. Sometimes there are family histories, but most of the time there's no clear cause. One of the things that I think most of us were taught in high school is that all of our brain cells were born before we were born. And that's part of the problem in that we don't replace brain cells with age. So we all lose brain cells with age, and these neurodegenerative diseases knock off specific groups of brain cells. And in Parkinson's disease, one group of brain cells that make an important brain chemical called dopamine prematurely die. And as Parkinson's go on, the loss of those cells are pretty dramatic. So Parkinson's described this disease 200 years ago, and it took another 100 years, for somebody, a pathologist, to notice the difference between those two sides of the slide. So the cells in what's called the substantia nigra, the black substance, have a pigment in them. And what was noticed by a Russian neuropathologist about 100 years ago was that in patients who died with Parkinson's, most of those cells were gone. You know, everybody loses about 10%, 20% of these, but in a patient who dies with severe Parkinson's, almost all of them are gone. And they're the ones that also make that brain chemical dopamine, and they're responsible for the typical movement-related signs of Parkinson's disease. Inside the cells, the question is, why do the cells die? And that is one of the biggest focus of Parkinson's research, understanding why they die and keeping them from dying, because they die very slowly. They die a couple percent per year. This is not something that rapidly goes on. These cells kind of just trickle away over a couple decades. And one of the things about them is inside them, they accumulate almost kind of crystals of abnormal protein. And this is the hallmark of almost all these neurodegenerative diseases, this accumulation of some form of abnormal protein. It's really a normal protein that's kind of slightly changed. And in Parkinson's disease, the abnormal protein is called alpha-synuclein. These glumps inside of cells are called Lewy bodies, named for the pathologist in the 1920s who first noticed them. And the biggest clue, for many, many years, we did not know what these Lewy bodies were made of. And when the first families were described in 1996 with a truly inherited cause of Parkinson's disease, the abnormal protein, the abnormal gene, was in fact the gene that makes this protein, alpha-synuclein, and then looking back with everybody who had died of Parkinson's where we had a brain, the abnormal accumulation was the same protein. So again, for the vast majority of people with Parkinson's, this protein becomes abnormal for reasons we're not clear about. In rare groups of individuals, they actually have a genetic cause for its abnormality. And as I mentioned, even James Parkinson's noticed that in general, this disease creeps up on people. It's hard a lot of times for a Parkinson's patient to tell you, when did you start feeling not normal? Sometimes they'll say, yeah, I remember after, a patient I saw yesterday said, I was hospitalized for this and then I never got better. But for the majority of patients, it's hard for them to pinpoint that this is a slowly progressive disease that kind of sneaks up on you. And that's what's going on in brain also. And that the early signs, changes in voice, kind of just lower voice volume, a little more mumbled speech, changes in handwriting, smaller handwriting, slower handwriting, difficulty with typical things that we don't usually give any thought to, tying your shoes, doing buttons. Now you have to think about it. Families will notice changes in the way they walk, just holding an arm against the side instead of just swinging it, walking more slowly, taking smaller steps, stooping, and of course the shaking of the hand, the single most common early motor symptom. One hand is shaking, usually while walking. And as I mentioned, the brain changes are occurring very, very slowly. They're occurring for years, maybe even a decade, before people ever notice any movement-related problems. And as a neurologist, I hate to admit that the brain is like every other organ in the body, which means it can take a lot of hits and keep on functioning very, very well. By the time somebody goes for dialysis, they've lost 95% of their kidney function. So it's not surprising that you can lose half of these brain cells and be perfectly normal. And that's what we call this pre-motor phase. Something's going on in brain, and the reason we know that is there have been researchers who have tracked identical twins of patients with Parkinson's and could virtually predict when, years later, that identical twin would get Parkinson's disease by the amount of gradual loss of these dopamine-containing cells. And now, these types of scans have been used for research for 20 years, and over the last few years, they're FDA approved. They're called DAT scans, and they're clearly abnormal, even at the time of diagnosis. And what you can do is you can watch as the years go on, this gradual loss of the ability to store dopamine in the brain. But again, they're abnormal even, again, in these identical twins. The scans were abnormal before they had any signs of Parkinson's, examined by, some of the best neurologists in the world. I think you guys met Dr. Longu. Dr. Longu's mentor, Dr. Hallett, examined these people, and everybody thought they were perfectly normal. But another 5 years go on, and then they started having signs of Parkinson's. So a very slowly progressive disease. And there were some odd things that would happen to people that they noticed even in the years before their movement was affected. Commonly, loss of smell, constipation, depression. But these are such common problems anyway, it was hard to associate them with Parkinson's. There is an odd abnormality of sleep called REM behavioral disorder, where people actually act out their dreams and thrash around during their dreams. You can find it nicely if you just put RBD into YouTube, you'll find videos of this. And for people who have this, they have an enormous risk of Parkinson's over the next 10 years, close to 90%. So that's one of these things that something is going on for years before the motor signs. And here are what we commonly call the cardinal signs of Parkinson's. This is what James Parkinson saw. Resting tremor, an oddball kind of tremor. So a typical tremor that everybody gets is there when you hold the limb out, when you're carrying something. If I give everybody a pile of books to carry, their hands and arms will shake. But Parkinson's tremor can be very odd, that when the limb is moving, it goes away, and when the limb is doing nothing, sitting in your lap, by your side when you're walking, that's when it shakes. It's not just there at rest, it's at its worst at rest. And then there's bradykinesia, which means slowness of movement, but it also goes with it is small movements. You can't do big movements and fast movements at the same time. You either have to pick one. You can do quick movements if they're small, or big movements if you slow down. And again, so that, it's kind of like a baseball pitcher. You can't speed and control. You can't have both. Rigidity, a lot of times patients with Parkinson's don't even notice it. Many, many people complain of muscle stiffness. The vast majority of people who complain of muscle stiffness don't have Parkinson's disease. But usually that muscle stiffness and slowness go together. And rigidity is something more that when a neurologist examines a patient with Parkinson's, they feel it. The patient may feel it less than the person moving the limb feels it. And one of the most, usually later signs, but one of the most, the signs that interferes most with day-to-day life is balance difficulties, the loss of postural stability, the loss of the ability to correct your balance when you get bumped or knocked over, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Well, I know it's, again, hard for me to admit that even among experts, there's only about an 80% accuracy when a physician says you have Parkinson's disease. Why? Because there are other neurodegenerative diseases. They're all rare by themselves, but when you add them all up, they add up to 10 to 20% of it, and they can certainly imitate Parkinson's disease. And sometimes, particularly patients with small strokes, also these things can imitate Parkinson's disease. These patients tend also not to respond well to Parkinson's medications. And in general, though, a lot of times when patients come to me for a second opinion with Parkinson's disease, and I say, you have Parkinson's disease, I have to actually sometimes suppress relief and a smile, because most of the diseases on this list are worse. So they're less responsive. I know it's not a lot really encouraging to the patient, but I know that except for essential tremor, where people have just tremor alone, all the rest of the diseases on this are less responsive to medication, and they have all the problems of Parkinson's plus other things. They're actually sometimes called the Parkinson's plus syndromes. They have early falling. They have early interference with speech, early interference with swallowing. They have terrible problems regulating blood pressure with position, where they virtually will pass out when they stand up, or have horrible blood pressure, high blood pressure when they lie down. They'll have incredible, the one thing, cortical basal, can have incredible limb stiffness that sometimes the horrible neurologic term for that is a useless limb, where they really can't do anything with it. And some of them will have changes in thinking, psychiatric changes very early in the course of the disease. And that's sadly a reason to get a second opinion, because these conditions require much more management than early Parkinson's disease. And one of the slides later says that when it comes to early Parkinson's, when it comes to treatment, everything works. That there are many, many things that you can do. And the goal in general is to relieve symptoms and improve people's function. And also, a lot of the medications we have, I think I caught the end of the talk here, and they were talking about some of the psychiatric problems that some of the Parkinson's medications. These are potent medications. They affect brain. And when they have side effects, they have brain-related side effects, which means they can cause psychological and psychiatric changes. Sadly, even after all these years of research, not yet do we have a treatment that's proven to keep the disease from getting worse. And that's usually described as the holy grail of Parkinson's research. And that's the most active aspect of research in the field. So in mild Parkinson's, you have symptoms that are annoying and intrusive, but people in general do a pretty good job of maintaining their day-to-day life. My standard cliche when patients come in and see me, my first question is your Parkinson's keeping you from doing anything you want to do or need to do? And a lot of people with mild Parkinson's, the answer is no, might be a little more difficult, but I can still do all the things I want to do and need to do. And that means I'm not giving them any change in medication. I'm not going to try to make people perfect. If I try to make people perfect with these potent medications, I will probably make them worse. So, but then as the disease goes on, it's really now that judgment about do you raise medications to keep people, my goal, keep people doing the things they need to do and want to do. But you might have to take more medication, and you might have to accept more medication side effects for that goal. And as we move from moderate to more severe Parkinson's, now that balance is tipping. You're taking more medication, but getting less benefit from it. And a lot of people, there's this idea floating around in the community that the medications have stopped working. This is not only false, but it's a dangerous idea. Because as patients have moderate to severe Parkinson's, it's the fact that the disease has gotten worse and the medications aren't good enough to make them normal. What will happen, and in the old days we used to do this as a form of therapy, which had the idiotic name of a drug holiday, is if you took a patient with severe Parkinson's and you took them off medication, they got dramatically worse. And actually a few people in the hospital died, and this form of therapy was abandoned. So the answer is, as one patient who is more devoutly religious than I am said, I was gonna, I'm gonna stop taking my medication and I'm gonna put myself in God's hands. And I said, you do that, you're gonna put yourself, you're gonna see him up close and personal real soon, So again, but the medications, and then in advanced Parkinson's, other things like balance and psychological and psychiatric problems start to occur that the medicines don't help, and sometimes the medicines make them worse. My mentor, Bill Weiner, used to talk about in the first decade or so of Parkinson's, you're always adding medications. And the last decade of Parkinson's, you spend a lot of time taking them away. Well, early Parkinson's, everything works. And again, whether all the medications are all FDA approved in early Parkinson's, I could give you an entire talk about which one you might choose, and that's a good discussion to have with your doctor about, but they all work. And the one thing that also has proven benefit is physical therapy and exercise therapy. That has proven benefit. What has no proven benefit, and it might work for some people, but it might not work for others, are all these vitamin therapies, complementary therapies, herbal therapies. Most of them are unstudied, and the few have been intensely studied don't work. But again, physical therapy, exercise-based therapy clearly works. Carbidopa, levodopa. I am embarrassed to say that after 50 years, carbidopa, levodopa is still the most effective and most widely used medication for Parkinson's disease. So why don't we use it on everybody? It's got some funky qualities to it, and usually what was referred to as dose fluctuations. Well, a typical medication that everybody takes usually lasts in the blood for about 8 hours or 12 hours. Carbidopa, levodopa only lasts in the blood for about an hour and a half. But in early Parkinson's, you can take it twice a day, you can take it 3 times a day, and it works all day. But after years of use in more advanced Parkinson's, it starts to behave like a drug that lasts in the blood for an hour and a half. And so people have to take it very frequently. And it always seems to be wearing off. And then an odd thing about it is some people who have taken it for many years become hypersensitive to it. So it actually causes abnormal movements. You want to restore normal movement, but then you kind of overshoot and you get what I usually, the technical term I now use with patients is the Michael J. Fox stuff. You know, moving around, things that everybody sees on TV when Michael J. Fox is in the public. But even Michael J. Fox will tell you he is much more functional with these kind of mild abnormal movements called dyskinesias than he is when his medications aren't working. So some patients, they're terrible, they throw them off balance, they have trouble walking because they're so wild. But for most patients, these mild dyskinesias still, they can do more than when they're not working. And we talk about this phenomenon, which we see for all drugs, called a therapeutic window. You know, giving a drug is like throwing a pass in football. You know, the old expression is when you throw a pass in football, three things can happen, only one of them are good. You know, and when you give a patient a drug, three things can happen, only one of them are good. You don't give enough, nothing happens, the incomplete pass. The good thing is you get an effect, and the bad thing is you might get an effect and you got too much, but you get significant side effects as well. So when you're in that therapeutic window, only good things are happening. But sadly for levodopa, when you've been taking it for many, many years, that therapeutic window is very narrow. And so the goal is you want to have patients who are on, they're able to move freely, they can do things they want to do, and they're not have these abnormal movements. But that's tough in more advanced Parkinson's. And now there are a whole bunch of strategies to keep people on as much of their waking day as possible without other bad things happening. And the strategies are some of these drugs make L-DOPA last longer. Some of them are long-acting forms of L-DOPA. And the newest one called Rytary lasts very long in the blood. And also some patients opt for an infusion, an adjustable programmable infusion of L-DOPA right into the gut, where they can regulate that level in the blood throughout their waking day. And then the medications called the dopamine agonists, their great advantage is they are more normal drugs. They last 6 to 8 hours. They even come in extended release preparations that last for 12 to 24 hours. And they're pretty good in mild Parkinson's, and they're used along with levodopa in more moderate Parkinson's. But they have more potential side effects, what we've heard about before called these impulse control disorders, which really do sneak up on people. Internet activity, shopping, gambling, sexual activity. And a lot of times patients aren't even aware that it's the drug that's doing that. And they don't really have as much effectiveness as L-DOPA. And in terms of the most aggressive treatment to kind of keep people on all the time is, remember, a drug has to go from your mouth to your gut to your blood to your brain, with lots of problems in all those steps. So why not bypass all of that? And in case of deep brain stimulation, a wire is put directly into the brain to do that. And again, so this is the most effective, but also the most aggressive treatment of this kind of fluctuation. So what these gizmos are, they're basically a pacemaker that goes into brain. We've known for many, many years that you could actually destroy a small piece of brain and restore biological balance of that brain activity in Parkinson's. And actually, I know it's totally seems bizarre that you could actually destroy part of the brain and improve something. But in Parkinson's, with a very targeted brain destruction, we've known for 50 years that you can improve some of the symptoms of Parkinson's. And in this case, this is a pacemaker that puts out a jamming signal and is adjustable and knocks out the abnormal activity in certain brain areas to balance brain activity between two areas and improve symptoms more consistently. They have an L-DOPA-like effect, but it is surgery. And in particular, you know, if anybody here who's had surgery and signed a surgical consent form, it always says bleeding, infection, and death. And as a neurologist, I firmly believe that the worst place that you can have bleeding or infection is in your brain. So, and again, We're only talking about 1 out of 50, 1 out of 100, which sounds like small numbers until it's you. Okay. We've actually, and I've been told to minimize any promotional aspects. If you feel that way, you can cover your ears now. But the one thing that we've been very involved with is a form of doing brain surgery without opening the skull, where you can focus in with sound waves and basically cook a small spot of brain. It takes about 3-4 hours. We've done it in patients with severe tremor, and we've just started to do it with patients with Parkinson's. If you want more information, Ms. Powell at her desk has more information about it. But it's so new, we're only doing it on one side of the body. So we're looking for people, oddball people, who are pretty normal on one side and have pretty severe Parkinson's on the other. And this is called focused ultrasound. And again, it's kind of slave to the MRI. The MRI can target an area within millimeters. And that's what you end up. You end up with a spot. That white spot is a site of brain injury. Now, as I mentioned, in advanced Parkinson's, the medications are sometimes not a lot of help, and in particular for loss of balance. And that's my friend and mentor, the late Bill Weiner, who's doing your typical pull test, which is you get behind a Parkinson's patient and you say, I'm going to bump you. Have to remind them that this is not the trust test where they're supposed to fall, that you bump them and you say, try to keep your balance. And a person with severe Parkinson's, you can kind of touch them with your fingers and they're going to go over with it. And that doesn't respond to medications. And then we have Parkinson's patients who are great in a chair. You know, they're sitting in a chair. I say, march in a chair. And they can move their head, and I say, now walk. And they walk a couple steps, and as soon as they come to a doorway and have to do anything, they freeze. So something more complicated is going on, and that's not responsive to medication. And many patients with Parkinson's will develop dementia, progressive loss of intellectual function that's to a severity that it interferes with day-to-day life. And the other part that the medications actually can make worse is that remember, some patients with Parkinson's have a lot of blood pressure fluctuation with position. Parkinson's medications can even worsen that. So they really are tough to use in people who have really wide blood pressure fluctuations. And all Parkinson's medications have the potential to make people nuts, or at least on a short-term basis, meaning they will see things that aren't there. That's a hallucination. They will believe bizarre things that are not true. That's called a delusion. And in particular in patients who are intellectually impaired, they can be very sensitive to these medications. And the other part about it is that the typical psychiatric medications, many of them will actually make the motor signs of Parkinson's worse, so they're hard to use in this situation. Sometimes we even use the anti-Alzheimer's medications. One of them is actually FDA approved for dementia with Parkinson's disease, and they can be helpful for both the psychosis and the dementia. But again, that balance, and in general, mental clarity wins over speed of movement. Falling responds to physical therapy, responds to gait training. There are no medications that improve balance. There are a zillion medications that can make it worse. Anything that has a sedative property that impairs somebody's clarity of thought will raise their fall risk, particularly at night. Many of these medications in the Valium family carry black boxes, you know, a risk of falling, serious falls. So again, anything that impairs mental clarity will raise the risk of falling. Education and training, the brain is very trainable when it comes to balance. World's greatest athlete put on a high wire without training will fall 100 times out of 100. Again, that balance center is trainable. And there are a whole variety of devices that are now available. Experimental stuff. As I mentioned, huge research to try to find things that will keep Parkinson's from getting worse. The focus has been this abnormal protein alpha-synuclein, and how do you get rid of it? How do you keep this normal protein from becoming abnormal? And there are many drugs in development and a few in trial that are focused on it. There are growth factors in gene therapy that are designed to make these brain cells healthier. And again, they work very, very well in animals. They work so-so right at this point in humans. And we use those same scans for dopamine to see if these patients now are growing new dopamine cells or terminals, which is possible. And of course, when we talk about having more cells, sometimes we think about, and maybe we're talking about in 2017, of using stem cells and implanting stem cells into patients to actually improve Parkinson's, not just keep it from getting worse. And I was told to end on a hopeful note, and I believe in well, let's just say a couple of my friends refer to me as the Zen neurologist because I believe in balance. And, you know, I'm basically hopeful, but there's no getting around that this is a challenging condition for everybody who has Parkinson's, everybody who takes care of somebody with Parkinson's, and for all of us on the front lines who are trying to beat this disease down. So my opinion is somewhere between these two quotes. The first I got from my father years ago, which is, but a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? You know, be hopeful, go and do things, try to do what seems impossible, and you might just do it. But remember, there are a lot of people who, both in medicine and in politics, that believe that they have the answer. And even though he was an awful person, H.L. Mencken did say some appropriate things, which is, for every complex problem, there's an answer that's clear, simple, and wrong. And I finished on time. Okay. Good.
Hi, Jared. That was such an interesting video. Thank you so much for sharing it.
I'm glad it worked. And Alexander, thanks for your help with getting the sound working, because you can tell I don't share videos that often. But for those of you that may have joined late, again, I'm Jared Cohen from the Parkinson Foundation of the National Capital Area, and I was sharing a video by Dr. Paul Fishman that was recorded at our educational conference, which is called the PFNCA Symposium. It was recorded a couple of years ago, and we found that it's one of the best overview of Parkinson's, presentations that we've seen in a long time. And we do many lectures a year. So Alexander, if it's okay, I'd love to take about 30 seconds and review the chat, because I did see some chats came in while the movie was going on, the video was happening, but I didn't want to cut away thinking it may impact your view. So if I can have about 30 seconds to review the chat.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No problem. I actually was able to check it out. Mr. Harold said Muhammad Ali had chronic progressive Parkinson before passing. Yep. That's true, right? Muhammad Ali had that.
It did indeed. And what's interesting from our perspective, and you saw in the first couple of slides of Dr. Fishman, there's about 60,000 people diagnosed a year. But what we hear about this disease when a celebrity is diagnosed, right? So Alan Alda, which was an actor on MASH and other shows, he's diagnosed. All of a sudden, there's a story on Parkinson's. But it comes out of the news again until there's a research development that's meaningful, or another celebrity is diagnosed. There was a member of Congress that was diagnosed in the last year, I believe. So it made the news. Parkinson's makes the news when she's diagnosed and comes out, but then it kind of fades in the background again. So yeah, but I don't know if you want to read a couple of these, or if you want me to scan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yvonne said, "Is Lou Gehrig's disease often diagnosed as Parkinson's?"
Not being a doctor, I wouldn't know how to answer that. So unfortunately, I wouldn't have the information to know about that. What we talk about with Parkinson's is the how difficult it is to diagnose. And that's because, it's very common, as Dr. Fishman referenced, for people to have symptoms for years before their diagnosis. Because a lot of times the symptoms of Parkinson's, and we talked about this last time when Jan presented, my coworker, is that the symptoms of Parkinson's can often be confused with symptoms of other diseases, or of just symptoms that happen when you're aging. And so it's, it's very common I met with someone this morning who was diagnosed, and I said, well, when you diagnosed? And she said, well, I was diagnosed in May, but now that I understand the symptoms, I had symptoms for the last 3 years, but I was diagnosed, 3 months, 6 months ago, whatever it was. So that's very, very common. It's that you're seeing symptoms long before your diagnosis. So what we like to do is we like to get information about symptoms out there into the community so people know to ask their doctor about it and to maybe get a referral to a specialist. And once again, the name of a doctor that specializes in Parkinson's is called a movement disorder specialist. They're neurologists with additional training, and you would ask your primary care doctor to help refer you to a movement disorder specialist. Yeah.
Oh, I've never heard of that term before, so that's really interesting. And yes, in the video, he said that 80% of the time it's accurate to diagnose Parkinson's because it has a lot of similarities to some of the other, and worse, he said, neurodegenerative diseases. So it's
Dr. Ellenstein, that's on our medical advisory board, often talks about, for example, a tremor. And she said, it's not just having a tremor,
Mhm.
but it's having a tremor that's more advanced than your peer age group. So for example, if your friends are all about the same age and everyone has a little shake because they're older, that's okay. But if your tremor is significantly greater than everyone else's tremor, that's where you may want to go ask your doctor and say, well, because again, it's often confused with conditions you may experience as you age. And so that may be an interesting way to think about it as well, thinking about some of these symptoms as compared to your peer group.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that. Mr. Harold said, towards the end of the video, he was talking about like, how much of the drug and, how that affects. He said, so unfortunate having used certain drugs. And he said it was an excellent presentation or video. I think too, I learned a lot myself as well in that video.
So believe it or not, we we consider that not a technical presentation. We do some presentations that are incredibly technical, and every slide has these really complex graphs that we can't figure out even ourselves, and we work here, And so while he did have a couple of charts, it wasn't overwhelming, and that's why we like to kind of show this as a really nice overview of the disease. But there's definitely a lot to take in. I mean, sometimes we'll do, one of the topics he talked about was deep brain stimulation. Often we have doctors that will do an hour presentation just on that one topic. Dr. Fishman did it in 2 slides, so just 1 or 2 slides. So there's lots more you can delve into, but this is just like I said, more of an introductory kind of a presentation.
Oh yeah, it was really so, especially the pictures. I wanted to be a medical doctor something when I was growing up. So seeing those images really helped me visualize what he was talking about. So I appreciate that, and I know the group does.
Are there other comments in the chat before we take questions?
No, we have we have Ms. Geraldine. I know you have your hand up, so we'll come to you then. We have Miss Louise first. Hi, Louise. You have a question or comment for Jared? Louise, you there? Okay, just again, you gotta hit unmute in the middle, Louise. Okay, if you come back, Louise, just let us know. Geraldine, I see you put, I wonder how harvesting stem cells will help the cure of Parkinson's. Is that your comment or question?
Yeah, that was going to be my comment.
So
Dr.
again,
Fishman mentioned stem cells towards the end of his presentation, but I didn't hear him say how the stem cells research would help.
So again, not being a doctor and certainly not being a researcher, it'd be hard for me to answer that question. I know at the periphery that there is research done in stem cell, but I can't speak to answer that specifically.
Yeah.
We are doing a program, and I'll talk about this program at the end of the presentation today. But we are doing a presentation on February 25th, where you'd have a chance to ask a question of a doctor live, and so that may be something. If you wanted to attend that, you could attend that and ask your question in that format. But I know that a lot of the times the doctors are very careful when they're talking about research because they want to make sure that their patients are doing processes that are FDA approved. There's lots of things out there that are different stages, and it's really easy. You'll get recruited into some kind of a trial where it's not yet FDA approved. It's really expensive to go fly across the country and participate in that trial. At the end of the day, you may have spent thousands of dollars and not had a change in your health outcomes. So I think it's really important to consult with your doctor if you're considering a trial, for example, or treatments like that to make sure that it's right for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I can't provide more information about stem
No,
cells.
that's good. That's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Geraldine. And Jared, if you could put maybe that link to that, it's probably you have to sign up to participate in
Yeah.
it.
So
If you could put the link in the chat.
let me explain that event real quick. So it's called Parkinson Pointers, and it is an event where people gather in person in community-based locations, and we serve refreshments. And then there's a doctor who's actually live streamed. So instead of live streaming to your home like we're doing today, you would gather at a location with other people that are interested in Parkinson's. The doctor would be live streamed to that location, and then we serve cookies and all kinds of refreshments. It's a way for you to meet others that are also impacted by Parkinson's, but also get access to a doctor live. And so that program takes place Sunday, February 25th. The location we have in Washington, D.C. is in the Chevy Chase neighborhood, which is in Upper Northwest, close to the Friendship Heights Metro. And it's right by the border of Montgomery County and DC. And I will go ahead and I'll put that link in the chat right now, so you can take a look at it and see if that would be of interest to you. So allow me a moment to pull that up here.
Yeah. And make sure if you want to check out the link, sorry, Jared. Yeah, make sure if you want to check out the link, you check this chat out before we end the Zoom, because you won't be able to view or open that link afterwards. So please make sure you check the chat if you're interested.
And the speaker is Dr. Evan Gray, who's a movement disorder specialist, and the topic is Parkinson's and nutrition. And that's again 1:30 on Sunday, February 25th. Again, it's free to participate. We just ask you to register.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that info, Jared. Next up again is Louise. You there, Louise? You got to hit unmute in the middle. Louise, just try again. If you have to leave the meeting and come back in, please do so. Next up is Ms. Duckett.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Ms. Duckett, how are you?
Okay. I'm not sure, did you mention whether the person has to be on a special diet, or do they have to eat any, is there any special, I want to say diet, but I guess that's the question. Do they have to be on a special diet?
So they don't have to be on a special diet. As people with Parkinson's don't have to be on a special diet. But the topic of our lecture coming up at the end of this month on February 25th is Parkinson's and nutrition. So that would be a great place to go to learn more about that topic. I do know anecdotally, but from talking to doctors, that just having a healthy diet, low in saturated fat, is going to be helpful. But to learn more about that topic, I would want to refer you to that lecture on February 25th. Now while the program is live February 25th at 1:30 p.m., within probably about 4 or 5 days afterwards, we are going to post that lecture to our website. So if you weren't able to make the lecture live on February 25th, you could visit our website, maybe by March 1st or 2nd, you would see that lecture as a resource for you on that topic.
Okay, thank you.
So often, it's interesting because a lot of our work is exercise classes, for example, to help people slow progression of Parkinson's. And a lot of my work, I'm talking to people, I'm saying, well, gosh, if you exercise, it's going to be really helpful for you, but that's something that everyone really knows, right? You probably know that ever since middle school, that exercise is helpful because of the cardio benefit and to fight heart disease. But when you have Parkinson's, it's really important to improve balance and strength, which is going to help with fall prevention. And so that's why so much of what we do as a foundation is focusing on exercise. But to the point about nutrition and eating healthy, again, we could tell you it's important to eat healthy because you're going to have all kinds of health benefits by eating healthy. But in terms of zeroing in on why specifically for Parkinson's, I want to refer you to that lecture on the 25th of February, or to come back after that in March and view the lecture on our website.
Again, thank you so much for the information and for being so thorough, Jared. We really appreciate it. Next up is Third time's a charm, Louise. You got to hit unmute in the middle. There you
Yeah,
go. You
it
have a
would not
question for
work,
Jared?
Alex.
Yeah, you can hear us, right? You have a question for Jared, Louise?
Yeah, it would not work the mute. Anyways,
Yep, that's fine.
I missed the what you put for that February 25th.
Sure. Well, there's a link in the
Um,
chat which has all the information
y-
on it. So if you click on the
Okay.
chat, if you hover over the command bar, click on
yeah,
the chat, you'd see it. And
Louise
I'll
had
get
to
it.
get out the meeting. Yeah, Louise had to get out the meeting. So,
Oh, I
when you leave
see.
the meeting, you can't view the chat. So I just re-put it in the chat for you, Louise. So
Okay.
if you tap on
Hmm.
that link, it'll open in
Yeah.
Safari and you can save it for later.
Alexander, I don't know
Okay.
if you do a post meeting email, but if you do, maybe you could include it there too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause, I have the problem since 2019 with the Parkinson, and I didn't realize I was walking with my back all stooped over
Hmm.
until somebody in my family says, straighten up. And I said, I am. And then I realized I was bending my elbow on the left at my side instead of moving it side, like the other side. And so, but I tried 3 medications, they never help. That L-Dopa, I end up with all kind of problems with them. But I'm on one now that's working. So
Are you seeing a movement disorder specialist as your primary doctor for Parkinson's?
I'm seeing a primary doctor at Kaiser, the
Okay.
neurologist there.
Okay, so you may want to ask if the neurologist is a movement disorder specialist, and if they're not, maybe they could refer you to someone at Kaiser who is a movement disorder specialist. Because we know that essentially think of a movement disorder specialist as a neurologist who does 90% of their time on Parkinson's. And so if you want to see someone who has the most up-to-date information to help you with your medicine management.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And hopefully we'll see you at that that February 25th lecture, because I think you
Yeah,
found it really
thank
helpful.
you. Yeah, that was a beautiful explanation, overview of everything, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Louise. Really appreciate that.
Thank
Next up
you.
we have Anne, and then we have Mr. Edward. Okay. Anne, I know you just lowered your hand. If you would like to share something, you
Well,
can unmute
yes, I
yourself.
did. I lowered it when you called on me, but I couldn't get on mute.
Mm-hmm.
That was really very informative. I thank you very much for that. I'm grateful to WildTech to bring in that because I have a cousin and we're not in the same city. And Dr. Fisherman was recommended to me by someone, and I have written him a letter, and he has been gracious enough to answer me to recommend someone in New Orleans. So it's just a blessing for some of the things that we learn, and that was really something that I can put in my brain and visualize and think about. I wish I could play that again, but anyhow, I just wanted you to know that that's very helpful to me because I don't know why they think that I know everything, and I'm way up here and they down there. But anyhow, I
Well,
was trying to help her, and we're very close, and she's been going through some. We both been going through some changes, so that I'm trying to help understand what she's going through.
Ms. Dennis, in addition, so while we're the Parkinson Foundation of the National Capital Area, we have a huge number of resources that are available online. We have people from all over the country that are involved with us and attend our programming, watch our videos, and attend our exercise classes, which are provided online. So we could be a great resource to your cousin. And I'll put in our chat our website address so you can share it with her, because we'd love for her to learn more about us and see how we can help.
Okay.
I just put our website into the chat box. So
Okay, let me find my pen and get that
Oh,
before I get
yes,
cut
you can
off.
also Google it too, Anne. If you just type in Parkinson's Foundation, the website will come up as
yeah,
well.
you want to put it.
Okay.
There are a lot of Parkinson foundations. You want to put
Yeah.
it Parkinson Foundation of the National Capital Area. It's important to put the full
National
name,
Capital Area.
Mhm.
Okay.
and then we should pop up. You also can visit pfnca.org. So a couple
Okay.
different ways to get to us, but it's,
Okay. All right. Thank you.
sure. Good luck with your cousin's doing okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Really appreciate
Mhm.
that. And then our, as you all know, our sessions are uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you want to review the session later on, just make sure you check out our YouTube channel. Last of the hands up is Mr. Hawkins. How are you today?
I'm doing just fine, and yourself? You just answered one of
Good.
my questions because I knew you were going to repost the session, but I also wanted to know, was there a direct way I could find that video to review it also?
So that video,
What?
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead. You're talking about the video that about from Dr. Fishman, right? Mr.
That's
Hawkins?
correct. That's correct. Mm-hmm.
So I think the best way to watch it in the short term would be watching it through this, on the Wild Tech, YouTube channel. We do rotate video content on our website, but that video is one that we rotate through, so it's not always available. And I don't know if it's currently there or not. I kind of pulled it from the archive to show it to you. But if Alexander, if you're posting this session to your YouTube channel, absolutely, I'd recommend go and watch that and kind of pause it and write down what you need to write down or screenshot different things you'd like to do.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Around a week's time or so. So just keep checking out our YouTube channel. Okay, Mr. Hawkins?
Will do. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much. You have a great rest of your day. Yep. Any other questions for Mr. Jared about anything we went over today? I really appreciate all of your questions and your comments using the chat. And it was quite an interesting presentation. So we're very lucky to have
And I know,
Mr. Jared on.
Alexander, I know last time we spoke, several people on the call either had a diagnosis or had a close friend or relative of the diagnosis. And I really hope that all of you that have a diagnosis or know someone with a diagnosis would join us for that event on February 25th, and where I could meet you in person, because I'll be at that location in Washington, D.C. when you register. And so we can talk more in person as well. So that's a really great way to meet others and have a chance to ask questions directly of a doctor at that event. Because again, doctors are more knowledgeable than I am, but we'd love to see some of you there. So again, that's called Parkinson Pointers. It's February 25th, and the location in Washington, D.C. is on Connecticut Avenue. Closest metro stop is Friendship Heights. And it's at 1:30 p.m.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Jarrett. Any other closing remarks about, any takeaways, from the video, or just any words of advice for our participants?
Well, it's a pleasure to see you all. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Alexander, for helping me with the tech.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much, Mr. Jared. And let's all thank him for hosting and presenting this information today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.